for people that don't know me, my name is Fergal Flynn. I'm 25 years old and I graduated at Cardiff Metropolitan University last year in environmental health. I did my work placement in a local authority between the different environmental health departments. And I graduated also with a specific award, the Rachel Stickler Award, for the student that embodied the values of environmental health. So what I'm looking to today is to talk to you about how you can better collaborate with the EHO, kind of getting into their mindset, and for people maybe newer into the industry, exactly what it all is about kind of compliance and how an EHO might actually deal with a non-conforming kind of business or domestic property. I think there is a lot to know and there is a lot of resources, and all the stuff that I'm talking about today, I'll have links for kind of further research that you can look into at the end. But this is kind of keeping it simple, what you need to know, stuff that I think before I started my degree and I was working as a pest controller, I wish I knew. And it's helped us in our business in working with our EHOs. So the first thing I want to talk about is how EHOs actually work. The EHO is a very vague term used around, but you do have different types of EHOs. You'll have EHOs working in food safety. They also cover a little bit of health and safety within those food premises, your cafes, your shops, that kind of thing. You've got your housing officers, they're the ones looking after things like your HMOs. And if there's someone's reporting a problem with a defect in their property, they're the ones that go out. And then you've also got environmental protection. They're the ones who are dealing with stuff, students and things like that. And sometimes they can kind of cross paths, a bit of environmental protection and housing and all the different forms, but they are different when you're sometimes speaking to them. They don't always deal with everything. Those are just there to look after everyone, making sure that everyone's living to a good standard. There's loads of legislation, loads of code practices to kind of bind people on what they're doing as an EHO. They serve notices to businesses, so they'll issue, for example, a hygiene emergency prohibition notice if there are, rat droppings everywhere. And then it goes all the way down to things like, a general advice. And they have to gather loads of evidence and make sure it's all legally sound on the worst case scenario, which is why it's really important for us to work with them to make their life easy. We have the same ideas as them. We want to get to the same outcome. So if we can help them in an easy way, which makes it less of a headache for us and for them. Some of the pressures on environmental health officers, I think, is really important to remember. As pest controllers, we're out here as a business at the end of the day, and we're looking at, we need to be able to make profit. We need to be able to pay our employees. We need to be at time issues. We can't just be going out to every call all the time. And EHOs kind of have similar pressure. So they have a lot of workload. As you can imagine, everything's coming in and they have to deal with everything and they have to prioritize all their problems. There's politics, that you have your politicians that try to get their neck in and try and say, look, we've had this complaint from a member of the public, what you're doing about it. And then bigger political things going on in the world about what prioritization we should be doing. And then local authority pressures, who the head honcho wants. And so it's very difficult sometimes for them to navigate. Limited resources, they're sometimes that we work in small teams and they've only got enough time in the day. So it's really important, again, be really efficient in how we can deal with them. And they don't know everything. On my degree, we only had maybe 3 or 4 days, maybe 2-3 hour sessions on pest control. It is quite limited. And then out in the field, I think environmental health officers are just learning as they go. So, don't expect them to know everything. Some of them will know more than others and they'll know the main aspects. We are the experts, we're the professionals, but we need to communicate to them in a way that makes them feel happy to ask us questions. You can't just assume that they know everything, but you can't be talking down to them either. So really trying to build some rapport with them. So different kind of enforcement options that they're looking to do. Always, first step, protocol is always informal advice. If that's an option, either through a letter or just speaking to them when they go out to do their food safety inspections. In the actual formal notices, you've got hygiene improvement notices. That's just to say, you need to improve your hand washing program or anything like that. And then you've also got remedial action notices, things that are a bit more to do with kind of structure of a property, so they used to kind of pest proofing, that kind of stuff. And if they need to shut down a business, they will issue what's called a HEPN, a hygiene emergency prohibition notice, and then they have to reply to the courts a few days after that. I think it's in 3 days for a hygiene emergency prohibition order. So it's really kind of good to know these things, just because then if you're speaking to environmental health officer, you know what's in their toolkit. And like I said earlier, I'll provide a resource later that kind of goes into that in a lot more detail if you're interested. Domestically, it's the same thing. The first step of call is always them coming out and informally speaking to the person that is having a problem. If someone complains that they have a rat from next door that keeps coming into their garden, they will go out and then inspect the property and speak to the next door neighbour. It's always the first step of call. It's not going straight to, we're going to serve a notice. And that's really important, because if you're speaking to someone, instead of just saying, oh, well, it's beyond the property, we can't deal with it because next door's not in, we've been given them a knock, you need to call environmental health. Well, environmental health are going to say, have you spoken to the neighbour? Have you gone through that informal route? And if you can guide your clients into say, well, actually, you need to speak to next door, you need to go there, knock in the evenings when they're in, and that will streamline the environmental health process. And it just makes you seem like you're something more professional because you understand the full process. And then there's different, again, depending on kind of what the actual problem is. You've got notices under the Prevention of Damage by Pest Act, the Housing Act, it's the Housing Officers, Environmental Protection Acts, different range of things. And it really is dependent on what the specific problem is. How they will do the work is they will say to someone, look, we've issued you a notice. For example, we've issued you a Section 4 under the Prevention of Damage by Pest Act, so you need to rid the land of your rats and mice. And if they don't do that within the time frame of 14 days, then the council can do what's called works in default. So that means that they will pay someone to do the work. And if you're building a relationship with your local environmental health department, then that can also mean that they trust you, you're credible, and they're going to bring you in to do works in default. Over the past few years, we've done things like house clearances for properties where they had the RSPCA in, and they had loads of animals. We had to go in there and do a full clearance. So we had to do flea treatment there, so it could be safe to be worked in, and rat eradication treatment, drainage work, all that kind of stuff. And that's all paid from the council. And then the council then bill the person that's got all the problems. And all of this comes under an enforcement hierarchy where they want to start at the lowest end. They want to be informal. They want to give you advice. And then only then do they kind of go up. Of course, if there is in a food business, rat droppings everywhere, then they have to issue a HEPN. But they want to go through those steps. They don't want to go straight to, we're issuing you a notice. So really taking that from the eyes of the EHO and looking at the situation and praising it and saying, well, this is what the EHO is more likely to do. Is it imminent risk? Is there really bad risk to health? What's the specific circumstances? Is the property that is causing the problem, is it an empty property? Is it living property? Is it family? Is it vulnerable people? All these kinds of things. It's really important to consider. And every environmental health officer will have different answers. They actually go out every year or two and they all have a standardized test that is different kind of responses on what they would do in specific situations. And they do get the full range when those tests kind of come back. And that's just to see our local authorities to see what the standards are. And it's down to each individual person and their individual assessment. I would also like to note that this is the language that they will be using: reasonable, proportionate, risk-based, a graduated approach. This is all things that if you speak to an environmental health officer and you're using this language, they're switched on. They know that you know what you're talking about. You're on the same wavelength. Just like if we're speaking for environmental health and they're saying stuff like IPM, we can see that, okay, they have a bit of knowledge. They've done some research. So if you're speaking to EHO, try and use that language when you can, just so they know that you know. So it works in default. I explained it a moment ago, but they serve a notice. There's a compliance period, so that'll be specifically within the legislation. So for example, PDPA Section 4, you're looking at 14 days. The council will arrange the works, and then the costs will go from the owner if the owner doesn't do the works. Some local authorities will do it slightly differently. Some of them won't even do it at all. If they can't do it, they will prosecute. It all depends on the funds and the pressures on that environmental health department. So, burden of proof. Many of you that might have taken someone to court before might know the different kind of burden of proof. In civil law, you look at the balance probability to think of the scale. And if the scale is more likely that something's happened, then that means that someone will usually be found guilty. And that's in the case if you, as a person, take another person to court, you're under civil law. But in criminal law, it's beyond reasonable doubt. So they need to be absolutely certain that this is what's going on has happened, that there is no question about it. This is really important because if the local authorities are prosecuting someone, so for example, if they are issuing a HUPN to a business for closure because there's cockroaches running around everywhere and it's creating a hazard to health, then they have to be absolutely certain. So they might take into things like your reports, your pictures, and they're more likely, even though you might provide amazing evidence, they're also going to go in and take their own fantastic evidence because it's really important to have this high standard. So wherever you can, if you're doing it domestically or in a commercial premises, trying to have good records and documentation just to make their life easier. But also remembering that they are going to want to go out and they want to take their own evidence. And if you're used to kind of getting into the angles and everything there and you're meeting them there, then you can say, look, can I grab your phone? I'll take the picture for you. And they'll usually say, yeah, that's no problem at all. And then you've got a great picture and you're working kind of together. So again, really important just to make sure all the evidence is there and try and support them, understanding that they really need, there's a high threshold of evidence for local authorities when they're prosecuting people. So a little case study, classic example of enforcement. So you've got Mr. and Mrs. Smith who just moved into a property and they are getting rats and mice running around from next door, and they've had a peek over the fence and they can see that there are rats feeding from the bird feeder, classic, and the good old compost heap. So they pick up the phone and they call environmental health. So environmental health, what they will do is they'll come out and they'll speak to Mr. and Mrs. Smith and they'll ask them, have you informally spoken to the neighbour? So we're going to call the neighbour Mrs. Jones. Have you spoken about the problem? That's always the first step. The next step is the environmental health officer will come out and they will speak to Mr. and Mrs. Smith and they will knock on the door of Mrs. Jones and see if Mrs. Jones is in. And if not, they might try to find some contact details from whatever resources they've got, or they might send them a polite letter. And if they can manage to get through to them, they will say, look, this is the problem. You've got rats and mice running around your garden. The root cause is from the bird feeder, from the compost heap. Can we get this done? And this is all kind of informal at this point. There's no notice. It can just be a chat. And they will say, look, we just need to get this sorted. And if it doesn't get this sorted, then after that kind of initial timescale, then they will issue a notice. So in this case, they'll issue a section 4. They need to get rid of the compost heap. They need to put it on slabs and fix it. Make sure that it's secure from pest ingress, and they have to do that within 14 days from initial phone call to the end result where pest activity has ceased. So for those that haven't heard of Safer Food, Better Business, it might be really interesting for you to just give it a Google, have a little look. Safer Food, Better Business is the recommended HACCP that is put on for smaller businesses. So if your cafe starts, they will be guided to do their HACCP. So that's kind of their food safety management plan through Safer Food, Better Business. So right here, I've just taken, it's 2 pages for pest control. I've taken an excerpt and you can see it's quite basic, it's quite standard. And these are the kind of things that is expected for a food business operator to know. They don't need to know a lot, but there is a little bit of things. So if you can read Safer Food, Better Business, a new business starts up, gives you a call, you go over, say, oh, so what HACCP plan are you on? Safer Food, Better Business, 95% of the time they are. Then you know what they know. You know that they've gone through and they've read this information, and that might just be how much pest control knowledge they know and what information that you need to tell them. And they might already know things about pest proofing, because you need to be very, very precise and very, very succinct. You don't want to overwhelm them again. They've got a lot on their plate. You need to keep it short and sweet and simple. Use good evidence, clear pictures. If you're doing a video of an area, try and bring it all the way around from where you enter site and show everything, because environmental health officers will miss it. I've been out in inspections with them, and I've shown them pictures of things that are very clearly, in a property where they could be, and they'll completely miss it. They'll completely miss that, and then it gets through to the point where they're asking another person to do these works, and then they've missed out like a very key area that they need to see and then concreting in. And again, they don't know everything, environmental health officers. So again, although you're there to say, here's a problem, here's the information, you can also recommend what needs to be done. And that really helps whatever EHO you're working with to take an approach that is holistic, that they've considered all the different options. Always try and get your take in that kind of environmental health enforcement, because that could be what they run with in the end. Simple language. Don't overcomplicate it. You just need to keep it simple, keep it easy, keep it bullet pointed, and make it as easy as possible. Don't use emotive language. Don't make accusations without proof. If you suspect that something's going on, you suspect that maybe it could be coming from several properties down the road. There might be drainage problems down the road, but the bird feeder from next door is kind of a catalyst that's causing it to happen. Make sure you specify what your suspicion is and what you know. It all builds to your credibility. And don't send incomplete and unclear reports. Make sure that they're pretty good and top notch. Get your colleagues to read them and make sure that everyone is on the same page and understands what you're trying to communicate. So when you're collaborating, make sure that if you do agree on something, that you're doing it. If the work's been done, then communicate back to them, make sure you're doing that. They like to know from A to Z what's going on, because when they go into their meetings and they say, how is Mr. and Mrs. Smith getting on with Mr. and Mrs. Jones, they can say, actually, yeah, no, we know where we are. Again, it helps build rapport with them, helps build relationships, understand it from their perspective. Again, all their pressures, all the different things that they've got available to them enforcement wise, and really kind of get into their headspace. And then once you're in their headspace, you can really help working with them. Keep it simple. And don't just bring your EHO in for anything and everything that's going on. Just try and refer your clients to contact environmental health when, they've done the informal route, they've spoken to their neighbour, they've been reasonable with their neighbour. And then after that, bring them in when they're needed. And then that takes a lot of work off environmental health man to do all those initial stages. Be human when you're interacting with them. Make sure you'll be personally asking them how they are, all these little things, so that, again, you're more credible, you're more reliable, they trust in you, because it can inevitably lead into more business for you when things like works and default needs doing. Don't bring all the issues to EHO, don't overwhelm them, keep them all succinct. And what benefits have we got? For us, easier problem resolution. We know the steps from beginning to end. We know the whole range. So for us, it's just going to make it easier interacting with clients. You're not just saying, oh, look, this is beyond us now. You need to contact environmental health. We know what the plan is now. Just makes it easy. Gives us credibility. Potential referrals for work. Again, works in default, or they might even, they shouldn't recommend you, but occasionally, they will kind of say, look, maybe this company is local, maybe give them a try. They can assist in contacting neighbours. So if you are struggling to contact a neighbour, maybe you don't need the full, we need you in, we need environmental health in to do this, that, or we just trying to get in contact with the neighbour. So if you have to go back and knock on them 5 or 6 times because you're worried, as an excuse, your client doesn't want to do it, you can ask them, look, I'm trying to get into contact with this neighbour, can you help me? That's all I need from you at the moment. And then they will get their number, they will get in contact with them, and you can exchange details. Those, again, to them, it's reliable information. Their life's easier, less time on their plate for each case. So when I say you're not on opposite sides, you're on the same team, I mean, it doesn't just cut off at you and then begin with EHO. You guys can work together from start to finish and be there throughout the whole process. And both of you can help make it a lot easier. For us, we can factor into the cost that we might do a lot of collaboration with EHOs. It's going to increase our admin, the amount of reports we're writing, the amount of pictures we might be taking. So we will factor that into the cost and say, look, we will actually fully solve this problem with you. We'll liaise with environmental health on behalf of you as our client. And people are usually happy to pay that extra price to know that you're just going to be with them the whole step of the way. So in regards to resources, things you want to look further into what we've talked about today, I believe these 3 pieces of information will cover all the bases. So the Food Law Code of Practice. So if you Google that, that'll bring you onto the Food Standards Agency website. Just stick to the Food Law Code of Practice. Go down, go to enforcement, and that's where all the information is. Everything we've covered today is going to be there, but in marginally more detail, all the stuff that you need to know. The local enforcement policy, really important to know your local enforcement policy. It's going to be very similar between local authorities, but there are going to be, what specific direction they want to go. Do they do works in default? Do they not? All those kinds of things going to be in their enforcement policy. And Safe Food, Better Business, have a look at that, see what it is. And it just helps when you're going into businesses, what their HACCP plan is going to be and what EHOs are recommended. Every EHO will recommend to newer businesses, have you run a business before? No. We recommend your food safety management plan is Safe Food, Better Business. Give it a Google, have a little 2-minute read. Happy days. And that's me done. Fantastic.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I've got a few comments here as well. We had some people saying that they've been in pest control for a long time. They've always tried getting along quite well with their EHO, which I'm sure this delights you greatly.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
And then we've got someone else who's also an EHO TSO, so I'm assuming Trading Standards Officer. Yeah. They cover food and hygiene. Could you elaborate on a little bit more on feed officers for us and what that might mean?
Feed officers, I believe they're working more with farms and things like that. I've never worked with a feed officer. I think if you're specifically working with more agricultural premises, then that will be a different thing. We barely even covered it in university because feed wasn't really on there.
No, because that's quite an interesting overlap there, isn't it? Because you'll have, so I used to look after a food manufacturing site that was on a farm. How would the balance there work between EHOs trying to manage a farm and manage a food factory on a farm?
Yeah, it sounds like pest on wild on there, doesn't it?
Have you got any sort of insights as to how an EHO might sort of approach that from like an independent viewpoint? If you've got a waste area where you're going to have a lot of rats near a food premises, how does that play out in the EHO playbook? Because I guess you got two different.
Well, it'll form part of their HACCP plan. So in everyone's HACCP plan, it's all going to be, although it is kind of this, like Safe Food, Better Business, it's one document, it is tailored to your specific business. So for food manufacturing environments, they've obviously got much more complex HACCP and food safety management plans. And for them, they will be talking more about the hazard that they are nearby kind of agricultural premises and adjacent to it. So their controls might be more intense. So instead of, for example, checking for proofing points every month, they might be checking them every week, and they'll be delegating probably that to their pest control contractor. So it's all kind of tailored to individual businesses and how they operate and the individual risks that they pose.
For pest controllers, as sort of food safety isn't really covered much in the level 2 at all, unless you do a specific level 2 health and safety, level 3 food. I think mine's like food manufacturing supervision. Do you think it's a good idea that all pest controllers should do an element of food safety training before they start working in these commercial kitchens? And
I think it's really important because you only know it from the pest control perspective. You can't see it from the food business operator's perspective and all the different challenges they face. What I believe that many food business operators are hiring a pest control contractor just so that it's ticked in the box. And as we all know, it is a collaborative effort working with food business operators. It's not just hire your pest controller, crack on, and then you're never going to have any problems. If you can understand all these different pressures that come to a food business operator, then that kind of helps you working with them because you understand the pressures that they've got. At the end of the day, they want to serve good food, they want to serve safe food, but there are so many things to consider. So if you can see that they are hiring you in just to fix their problem, but then you can speak to them and have them realize that it is a collaborative effort working together, then that helps. And I think doing your food safety, going to do your different levels is fantastic. Starting off on your level 2 food safety, and then if you really want to go advanced, go to level 3.
Have you got any other tips or tricks for pest controllers for dealing with EHOs?
All remembering that they are people, they've got their own problems, they've got their own workloads, and just trying to make it easy for them. But since I've come back from university and my placement and working back in pest control over the past year, I've just found that a lot easier because I know exactly what environmental health officers want, what they need, and what kind of angle of enforcement they can go. Before I went to university, I did just think, oh, we can't get a hold of this neighbor. They've got a problem next door with rats. Let's just tell my client, you call environmental health. And the client's calling environmental health. They don't know how to fully explain the problem. They just want to say, oh, I've got rats in my garden. They can't say, I've got rats in my garden. Probable causes could be X, Y, and Z. And there are rat ingress specifically around the drains or around the back shed or, where it is. So if you can guide your customers all the way through the process, it makes you look like a professional. It makes them very happy. And if you factor it into your costs, it is a bit more work, but if you factor that into your costs, then you're giving a better service. It's better added value. And then people will come back to you. They say, look, actually, we had a problem. They did a bit of pest proofing and actually they held my hand through the whole process of contacting the council. Think how fantastic that looks on you. People just, at the end of the day, they're calling you for pest control, but they want their problem solved. And if you can help solve their problem by doing these further avenues and working with enforcement, then I think we're going to look fantastic as an industry. It just brings us all up.
Do you have any other sort of closing remarks or
I think the last thing would be to say, if you are interested in anything that I've said today, you can either message me on LinkedIn, type in my name and just connect with me. And all the things that I've talked about are on the resource page, the Better Business, local enforcement policy, and the food code of practice. It's really that very in-depth documents. For environmental health officers, a lot of what they need to know is in practice guidance documents. So if you're interested in things like housing, you can look at the HHSRS guidance for housing hazards, and that will tell you everything you need to know. It's maybe 200 pages long to do everything you need to know about housing hazards, how they assess pest problems in a housing environment, how they assess damp problems in a housing environment, all very much in depth. And it's all readily out there. If you just type it in, housing, environmental health, practice guidance, things like that, it will all come up. And I think ridiculous amount of resources online, if you're ever interested or any uncertainty on what's going to happen when you contact environmental health.
Yeah. I think it's nice you touched on housing with ASVAB's law coming in at that's coming in a couple of months' time now, isn't it? And that's all around damp and pests and stuff as well. So no, thank you for sharing those resources. And at least there's lots of excuses for people to do CPD now as well, just off your
Yes, of course.
Appreciate you taking time out today. Thank you very much for joining us. And I will get your contact details up for those who want them. Thank you very much.
Thanks.